Hello and welcome to Timeless Tales, where ancient myths and forgotten legends drift through the quiet hours of the night. Before we begin tonight's story, I'd love to know, what time is it where you are, and where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below. I love seeing how far our stories travel. If you enjoy winding down with mythology, history and timeless wonder, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a night of stories meant to calm your mind and spark your imagination. Now, get comfortable, breathe deep. Let's step into a world where gods walked among mortals and legends were born beneath the stars. Tonight, we travel back to ancient Greece to hear a story often left untold, the mysterious fate of a princess whose life became entangled with the will of the gods. So make yourself comfortable, close your eyes, and let your mind drift to the shores of Aulis, where our story begins. The sea at Aulis lay unnaturally still. 1,000 ships sat motionless upon waters that resembled polished bronze in the morning light, their sails hanging limp and useless against the masts. No ripple disturbed the surface, no breeze kissed the cheeks of the waiting men. The great expedition to Troy, assembled to reclaim Queen Helen and restore honour to Greece, found itself imprisoned by this eerie calm. Day after day, the stillness persisted. The gathered kings and warriors grew restless. Voices of discontent rose and fell like the tides that should have been carrying them eastward. In his tent, High King Agamemnon of Mycenae paced with the agitation of a caged lion. His brother Menelaus, whose wife Helen had been taken to Troy, watched him with hollow eyes. "The men speak of omens," Menelaus said softly. "They say the gods have turned against us." Agamemnon paused, his shadow long against the tent's fabric. "The gods have not abandoned us. They test us." But even as he spoke these words, doubt gnawed at him. They had been stranded for nearly a month. Provisions were dwindling. Morale was fracturing like pottery dropped upon stone. Something had to be done. That evening, as the stars emerged in a sky still bereft of wind, Agamemnon summoned Calchas, the most revered seer among the Greeks. The old man entered the king's tent with slow, measured steps, his eyes already distant as if gazing into realms invisible to others. "Speak, prophet," Agamemnon commanded. "Why do the gods deny us passage? What have we done to deserve their scorn?" Calchas closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they seemed to reflect a different light, one not present in the tent's oil lamps. "It is Artemis, the huntress goddess," he whispered. "You have offended her, Agamemnon." The king's hands tightened into fists. "How?" "I have made all the proper sacrifices. Last autumn, in the sacred grove near your palace, you slew a stag, her favoured creature. You boasted that even Artemis herself could not make a finer shot. Such pride has consequences." Agamemnon remembered the hunt. He remembered the magnificent stag with antlers like a crown of branches. He remembered the satisfaction of the kill and the words that had indeed passed his lips. "What does she want?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Gold? 100 sacrificial beasts?" Calchas shook his head slowly, regret etching deeper lines into his weathered face. "She demands a sacrifice equal to what you took from her, the noblest deer of your own forest." The prophet paused, seeming to gather courage before continuing. "Your daughter, Iphigenia. The wind will not blow until Artemis receives her due." The tent fell silent. Even the distant sounds of the camp seemed to recede, as if the whole world held its breath. Agamemnon stood perfectly still, his face a mask of stone. "Leave me," he finally said. Alone, the king of Mycenae fell to his knees. Impossible. A choice no father should face, his daughter or his duty. The expedition could not be abandoned. Too much was at stake. The honour of Greece, the oath sworn by all the kings, the future of his line as High King. Yet Iphigenia, his firstborn, his gentlest child, how could he even contemplate such a sacrifice? For 7 days and 7 nights, Agamemnon neither ate nor slept properly. He avoided the counsels of the other kings who were growing more impatient by the day. Whispers spread through the camp. The gods had cursed their mission. They should return to their kingdoms before some greater disaster befell them. On the 8th morning, Odysseus, the clever king of Ithaca, sought Agamemnon in his tent. "The army fractures," Odysseus said without preamble. "Some speak of returning home. Others talk of selecting a new leader. What did the prophet tell you, Agamemnon? What price do the gods demand?" When Agamemnon revealed the terrible prophecy, even the ever-practical Odysseus fell silent for a long moment. "A cruel choice," he finally said. "But is it truly a choice? If we abandon this war, Paris's theft goes unpunished. Troy will believe they can insult Greece without consequence. More wives will be taken, more kingdoms undermined, and the men, they swore oaths. Breaking such oaths invites the Furies' wrath upon us all." "She is my daughter," Agamemnon whispered. "And you are king," Odysseus replied gently. "Kings cannot be fathers first." By sunset, Agamemnon had made his decision. With a hand that trembled slightly, he wrote a message to be delivered to his queen, Clytemnestra, back in Mycenae. The letter spoke of joy, not sorrow. It announced that the mighty Achilles had requested Iphigenia's hand in marriage, and that she should be brought to Aulis immediately for a wedding ceremony before the fleet departed. It was a lie born of necessity, for Agamemnon knew that neither his wife nor his daughter would come willingly to what truly awaited at Aulis. Far from the stillness of Aulis, in the palace of Mycenae, Iphigenia sat in the women's quarters, weaving at her loom. At 16, she had blossomed into a young woman of rare beauty and gentler still disposition. Unlike her fiercer mother or her ambitious younger sister Electra, Iphigenia possessed a quiet grace that reminded many of flowing water, both soft and persistent in its nature. The rhythmic movement of the shuttle through the thread soothed her, creating a melody of creation that required no words. The tapestry taking shape beneath her fingers depicted Artemis, the virgin goddess of the hunt, running with her sacred deer through a moonlit forest. Iphigenia had always felt drawn to Artemis, despite, or perhaps because of, the goddess's reputation for both fierce protection and swift vengeance. "Your father has written," her mother's voice interrupted her weaving. Iphigenia looked up to see Clytemnestra standing in the doorway, holding a sealed letter. The queen's expression was difficult to read, a mixture of pride, concern, and something that might have been suspicion. "What news from Aulis?" Iphigenia asked, setting aside her shuttle. "Prepare yourself for tidings that will change your life," Clytemnestra said, approaching to sit beside her daughter. "Achilles has asked for your hand in marriage. Your father wishes us to bring you to Aulis immediately for the wedding ceremony." Iphigenia's hand stilled on the half-finished tapestry. Achilles, the greatest warrior among the Greeks, son of a goddess, whose fame had spread throughout the lands even before the gathering at Aulis. She had never met him, never even seen him from afar. "So suddenly?" she asked, her voice small. Clytemnestra folded the letter carefully. "Your father writes that Achilles saw your portrait I sent him, and was struck by your beauty. He wishes to secure the marriage before they sail for Troy. It is a great honour, daughter, the son of Peleus and Thetis, half divine himself. Your children would be of the noblest blood in Greece." Iphigenia gazed down at her tapestry, at the figure of Artemis running free through the forests. Something inside her recoiled at the thought of leaving her home so suddenly, of binding herself to a man she had never met, a warrior whose hands had already taken countless lives. "I had thought," she began hesitantly, "I had thought perhaps to serve in Artemis's temple, to learn the sacred ways of the goddess." Clytemnestra's expression softened with understanding, but her voice remained firm. "Many young women dream of such a life, but we are royalty, child. Our marriages forge alliances that protect our people. This union will bind the house of Mycenae forever to the line of Achilles. It is your duty. Duty. The word settled heavily on Iphigenia's shoulders. Had she not been raised to understand that royal blood carried obligations as well as privileges? Her father led 1,000 ships to war for the sake of duty and honour. Could she do less? "When must we leave?" she asked. "Tomorrow at first light," Clytemnestra replied. "We will take only what is necessary. Your father has promised that all you need for the ceremony will await you at Aulis." That night, Iphigenia stood at her chamber window gazing up at the stars. The moon hung full and bright, Artemis's moon. In the garden below a deer appeared, delicate and silver in the moonlight. It raised its head, seeming to look directly at Iphigenia, before disappearing back into the shadows. An omen, a farewell. Iphigenia couldn't be certain, but as she packed her few treasured possessions, a bone comb, a small statue of Artemis, a lock of her sister's hair, she could not shake the feeling that she was preparing not just for a wedding, but for some greater transformation. In her dreams that night she walked through endless forests, following the sound of hunting horns that always remained just beyond reach. And when she finally caught a glimpse of the huntress goddess, Artemis turned to her with eyes that held both terrible knowledge and infinite compassion. "The journey is longer than you know," the goddess said in her dream, "but I shall be watching." Iphigenia awoke with the words still echoing in her mind, a thin sheen of sweat cooling on her brow despite the mild spring night. Outside, the first hints of dawn were touching the eastern sky. It was time to leave for Aulis, for her wedding, for the future that awaited her there, whatever it might truly be. The journey to Aulis took 7 days, 7 days of rocking carriages, of dust rising from the road, of nights spent in rustic inns, or the homes of nobles who opened their doors to the Queen of Mycenae and her daughter. With each passing day, Iphigenia felt the distance growing between the life she had known and whatever awaited her at the shore. Clytemnestra filled the journey with talk of wedding preparations, of what life as Achilles' wife might entail, of the children they might have. Iphigenia listened dutifully, asking appropriate questions when expected, smiling when her mother described the honour that would come with the union. But her dreams remained filled with forests and moonlight, with the sound of a hunting horn calling her towards some unknown destiny. On the morning of the 7th day, they crested a hill and beheld the Bay of Aulis spreading before them, and the breathtaking sight of 1,000 ships lined along the shore, their sails furled, their prows pointing eastward toward Troy. Countless tents dotted the shoreline, and even from a distance they could see the movement of thousands of men preparing for war. "There," Clytemnestra said, pointing, "the largest tent with the gold standard, that will be your father's." Iphigenia's heart quickened at the thought of seeing Agamemnon again. It had been nearly a year since he departed to gather the expedition. Would he look older? Would war preparations have hardened something in him? And somewhere among those countless tents was Achilles, the man who would soon be her husband. As their carriage approached the encampment, Iphigenia noticed something strange. No flags fluttered, no cloaks billowed. The air was completely still, unnaturally still. It was as if the world itself were holding its breath. The reception that greeted them was oddly subdued. Guards escorted them directly to Agamemnon's tent, their expressions carefully blank. When they entered, they found the king alone, his face drawn with what might have been exhaustion, or something deeper. "My husband," Clytemnestra said, embracing him. "We have come as you requested. Where is Achilles? When will the ceremony take place?" Agamemnon's eyes moved to Iphigenia, who had respectfully knelt before him. "Rise, daughter," he said, his voice hoarse. "Let me look at you." Iphigenia stood, meeting her father's gaze. Something in his eyes made her blood run cold, a mixture of love and despair that she could not understand. He embraced her tightly, so tightly it almost hurt. "Father," she whispered, confusion rising within her. "There is much to prepare," he said, releasing her abruptly. "You must rest after your journey. We will speak more of the wedding tomorrow." But tomorrow brought no wedding preparations. Instead, Iphigenia noticed strange behaviours among those around her. Servants avoided her eyes. Warriors looked upon her with expressions of pity when they thought she wasn't watching. Her father remained distant, occupied with endless councils. On the third day at Aulis, Iphigenia encountered a young soldier who did not know who she was. When she mentioned the upcoming wedding to Achilles, his face registered shock. "I serve in Lord Achilles' company," he said. "He has spoken of no wedding. Indeed, he has been arguing with the king these past days over—" He stopped suddenly, seeming to realize he had said too much. "Over what?" Iphigenia pressed. But the young man quickly excused himself, leaving Iphigenia with growing suspicion in her heart. That evening she slipped away from her attendants and made her way through the camp, drawing a cloak around herself to remain unrecognized. She followed the sound of the raised voices to a tent larger than most, though not as grand as her father's. Outside, she hesitated, listening to the heated argument within. "I will not have my name used for such treachery," a young, passionate voice declared. "To lure an innocent girl to her death with promises of marriage to me, it dishonours us both." "Lower your voice, Achilles," came the measured tones of Odysseus. "What's done is done. The oracle has spoken. Without this sacrifice, the fleet cannot sail." "Sacrifice?" The word escaped Iphigenia's lips in a horrified whisper, just as the tent flap was thrust aside and a young man stormed out. Tall, golden-haired, his face contorted with righteous anger. He nearly collided with her in his haste. Their eyes met, and in an instant he seemed to know who she was. "Princess Iphigenia," he said, his anger giving way to a more complex emotion. "I am Achilles, son of Peleus, and you have been deceived." Within moments, the truth spilled out between them. There was no wedding. There never had been. Iphigenia had been summoned to Aulis to die, her blood to be spilled on Artemis's altar to win favourable winds for the Greek fleet. "My father," Iphigenia whispered, the betrayal cutting deeper than any blade could. "He obeyed the oracle," Achilles said, his voice gentler now. "I want no part in this deception. I will protect you, princess. You can flee tonight. I have men loyal to me who will see you safely away from Aulis." Iphigenia stood motionless, the night breeze, the first she had felt since arriving, stirring her hair. Flee? To where? Her mother would stand against this certainly, but could even a queen's fury prevail against an oracle's decree and the will of 1,000 kings and warriors eager to sail for Troy? And deeper still, a strange calm was settling over her, replacing the initial shock and fear, the dream of Artemis, the sense of being called to some unknown destiny. Perhaps this was what the goddess had been preparing her for. "I thank you for your courage, Lord Achilles," she said with quiet dignity that surprised even herself, "but I will not flee." "They mean to kill you at dawn," Achilles protested, "to cut your throat like a sacrificial deer." "I know," she replied, and the words seemed to come from some deeper part of her, some wellspring of strength she had not known she possessed. "But I am the daughter of Agamemnon. If my death will save the lives of countless Greeks who might otherwise die in a failed expedition, if it will restore honour to our kingdom, then perhaps this is my purpose." Achilles stared at her with newfound respect mingling with his horror. Such courage should not end on a bloody altar. "Perhaps it won't," Iphigenia said, thinking again of her dream, of Artemis watching her with those ancient knowing eyes. The gods work in ways we cannot always understand. Dawn broke over Aulis with the first hint of a breeze, just the faintest stirring of air, but enough to make the warriors look to the sea with hopeful eyes. Word had spread throughout the camp. The princess would be sacrificed, and the winds would come. Clytemnestra had learned the truth as well, her rage and grief shaking the very walls of Agamemnon's tent. She had been confined now, kept under guard to prevent her from interfering with what the kings had decreed must happen. Her curses against her husband echoed in Iphigenia's mind as attendants dressed her not in a wedding gown, but in pure white robes suitable for a sacrificial offering. "We will make it quick," one of the priestesses whispered, unable to meet Iphigenia's eyes as she draped a garland of white flowers around the girl's neck. "You'll feel almost nothing." Iphigenia did not reply. She had not slept, had spent the night in prayer instead, not begging for rescue, but for understanding, for the strength to face what was to come with dignity, for some sign that Artemis, the goddess she had always felt drawn to, had not abandoned her entirely. The procession to the altar was silent. The 1,000 ships waited. The 1,000 kings watched. Agamemnon stood at the altar, his face a mask of stone, though his eyes revealed the torment within. Beside him, Calchas the seer held the sacrificial knife, its blade gleaming in the early morning light. Iphigenia walked steadily, her gaze fixed not on the altar or the knife, but on the sky above. The clouds were beginning to move now, pushed by a strengthening breeze. Around her neck, the flower garland released its sweet scent, reminding her of meadows she had run through as a child, of forests she had dreamed of exploring. As she mounted the steps of the altar, curious peace settled over her. She was afraid. Yes, of course she was afraid. But beneath the fear was a strange certainty that this was not truly an ending. "Daughter," Agamemnon said, his voice cracking. "Father," she replied calmly, "do not grieve for me. I go willingly for the honour of Greece." A murmur ran through the assembled warriors. Such courage from one so young, from a maiden who should have been weeping or begging for mercy. Even Calchas seemed moved, his ancient hands trembling slightly as he raised the knife. "Great Artemis," the seer intoned, "accept this sacrifice in payment for offence given. Release your winds that we might sail for Troy. Receive this maiden into your sacred realm." Iphigenia closed her eyes as Calchas raised the blade higher. She felt the breeze strengthen suddenly, whipping her hair about her face. She heard the collective gasp of the crowd, and then a sound like the rushing of mighty wings, a wind that seemed to come from everywhere at once, a blinding light that penetrated even her closed eyelids, turning the world blood red for an instant. The knife never fell. Instead, Iphigenia felt herself enveloped in something like a whirlwind, lifted bodily from the altar. Her eyes flew open to glimpse the astonished faces of the Greeks falling away beneath her. For a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw a tall woman with a silver bow standing beside her, a hand firmly clasped around her wrist. A woman with eyes ancient as the moon itself. "Artemis," Iphigenia breathed. Then darkness claimed her, a gentle darkness like slipping beneath the surface of a cool forest pool. Below, on the altar, the Greeks beheld a miracle. Where Iphigenia had stood, a magnificent deer now lay, its throat cut, its blood pooling on the stone. The wind rose to a roar, filling the sails of 1,000 ships. The sacrifice had been accepted, but the maiden herself was nowhere to be seen. Calchas lowered his bloodied knife, his eyes wide with awe. "The goddess has taken her," he declared. "Artemis has claimed her own." Agamemnon fell to his knees beside the dying deer, tears streaming freely down his face. Whether from grief or relief, none could say. Around him, the warriors of Greece raised their voices in praise of Artemis, who had shown mercy even while demanding her due. And somewhere, carried on winds not of this world, Iphigenia of Mycenae journeyed toward a destiny none had foreseen, but of all herself. Consciousness returned to Iphigenia like the slow unveiling of stars at twilight. First, sensation. The feel of cool stone beneath her cheek, the scent of unfamiliar incense hanging heavy in the air. Then sound, the distant crash of waves against a shore, the soft whisper of flames. Finally, sight. She opened her eyes to a world utterly changed. She lay upon a stone floor in a circular chamber. The walls rose to a dome ceiling, open at its centre, revealing a night sky, brilliant with stars arranged in unfamiliar patterns. The chamber was illuminated by a fire burning in a bronze brazier, its flames an unnatural silver blue that cast more shadows than light. Slowly Iphigenia sat up, her white sacrificial robes now somehow transformed into a longer garment of pale grey, embroidered with silver thread in patterns resembling the phases of the moon. Around her neck, the flower garland remained, though the blossoms had not wilted. If anything, they seemed more vibrant, more alive than before. "You have awakened," came a voice from the shadows. "Good. There is much to be done." A woman emerged into the light, tall and gaunt, with silver-streaked black hair falling unbound to her waist. Her face bore the marks of great age, yet her eyes were clear and sharp as polished obsidian. She wore robes similar to Iphigenia's, though hers were darker, the embroidery more elaborate. "Where am I?" Iphigenia asked, her voice sounding strange to her own ears, as if it had been unused for a very long time. "Who are you?" "You are in Taurus, at the edge of the known world," the woman replied, "and I am Thea, high priestess of Artemis in this place. The goddess has brought you to us, chosen one." Taurus. Iphigenia had heard the name in tales, a remote land across the eastern sea, inhabited by people who spoke no Greek and worshipped strange gods with stranger rites. How far she had been taken from Aulis, from Greece, from everything familiar. "The goddess saved me," Iphigenia whispered, memories of the altar returning, the knife, the light, the sensation of being lifted away. Thea nodded solemnly. "Artemis does not intervene lightly in mortal affairs. If she spared you from the sacrificial knife, it was for a purpose. You've been chosen to serve her here, in this most sacred and secret of her temples." "Serve her? How?" "Come," Thea said, extending a hand to help Iphigenia rise. "I will show you." Iphigenia followed the priestess from the circular chamber into a corridor carved from living rock. The walls were decorated with ancient paintings depicting Artemis in her many aspects, as the huntress with her bow, as the protector of young women, as the mistress of wild creatures. But there were other images too, darker ones that made Iphigenia's heart quicken with unease. Artemis demanding sacrifice, Artemis punishing those who defied her laws. They emerged onto a stone terrace overlooking the sea. Below, waves crashed against jagged cliffs in the moonlight. Above, the unfamiliar stars wheeled slowly in their course. And before them stood a great altar of black stone stained with what could only be blood. "The people of this land have worshipped Artemis since time beyond memory," Thea explained. "But their understanding of her is different from the Greeks. Here she is known as the Taurian Artemis, and her thirst for blood is never quenched. Any stranger who comes to our shores must be sacrificed upon her altar." Horror crept through Iphigenia's veins like ice water. "You kill shipwrecked sailors, innocent travellers?" "Such is the law of the goddess in this place," Thea replied with no trace of apology. "And now, it seems, you have been chosen to be her voice, her hand, the new high priestess of Taurus." "No," Iphigenia whispered, backing away. "I cannot. I will not take human life." Thea's expression remained impassive. "You are willing to give your own life to appease the goddess. Why do you now question her will? Artemis saved you from one altar only to bring you to another. This is your purpose. No." "There must be some mistake," Iphigenia insisted. "The Artemis I have always honoured is stern but just. She would not demand such terrible rites." The gods wear different faces and different lands, Thea said. You must learn to serve the goddess as she wishes to be served here, or perhaps... A shadow of uncertainty crossed the old priestess's face. Perhaps that is why she's brought you to us, to show us a new way to honour her. That remains to be seen. In the days that followed, Iphigenia learned the ways of the temple. There were 12 priestesses in all, with Thea the eldest and most revered. They lived in stone chambers built into the cliff face, isolated from the nearby settlement of the Taurian people. Their lives followed the cycles of the moon, different prayers, different rituals for each of its phases. Iphigenia was given sacred texts to study, written in a script she did not recognise but somehow found she could read. Another gift from Artemis, Thea explained. She learned to tend the eternal flame in the circular chamber, which was called the moon heart. She was taught to mix the sacred incense, to read omens in the flight of birds, to interpret dreams, but she refused to participate in the blood sacrifices. Each time a stranger was captured on the shores, a rare occurrence in this remote place, Iphigenia found some reason to be elsewhere, some ritual duty that kept her from the black altar. Thea did not press her, seeming content to wait for Artemis herself to resolve this impasse between the Greek way and the Taurian way. The seasons turned. The moon waxed and waned countless times. Iphigenia's memories of Greece grew distant, dreamlike. Did her family believe her dead? Had the fleet sailed for Troy? Was the war over or still raging? There was no way to know in this isolated place, where even the stars told different stories. Slowly, a kind of peace settled over her. The temple became home. The other priestesses, initially wary of the foreign girl chosen by the goddess, gradually accepted her. Her days took on a rhythm as regular as the tides: prayer, study, ritual, contemplation. In the quiet hours of night, walking the cliff path beneath the alien stars, Iphigenia sometimes felt the presence of Artemis walking beside her, not as the bloodthirsty deity the Taurians worshipped, but as the wild, free goddess she had always sensed in the forests of her childhood. "Why did you bring me here?" she would ask the empty air. "What is my purpose in this place?" No answer came in words, but sometimes in dreams she saw visions: a deer running through unfamiliar forests, a brother wandering lost, a sacred statue waiting to be carried home. Waking, she could never quite grasp their meaning, but a sense of anticipation grew within her, a certainty that she was waiting for something or someone. And then, one stormy night, nearly 7 years after her arrival in Taurus, the waiting ended. Iphigenia stood on the cliff terrace, watching lightning split the sky over a raging sea. Wind tore at her robes and hair, but she remained motionless, entranced by the raw power of the storm. Such weather often claimed ships that ventured too close to the treacherous coast, dashing them against the rocks. Another sacrifice for the hungry goddess of Taurus. As if summoned by the thought, a Taurian guard appeared at the terrace entrance. "Priestess," he called over the wind, "a Greek ship has wrecked below. 2 survivors were captured on the shore." Iphigenia's heart contracted painfully. Greeks, the first she had encountered since coming to this place. Countrymen who spoke her language, who might bring news of home, of the war, of her family, and they would be slaughtered on the black altar unless she intervened. "Bring them to the temple prison," she commanded. "I will examine them myself before any ritual is prepared." The guard bowed and departed. Iphigenia remained a moment longer, gazing out at the storm-tossed sea. Something was changing. The air felt charged with more than just lightning, with possibility, with destiny long delayed now rushing to meet her. "Is this why you saved me?" she whispered to the goddess, whose presence always seemed strongest in wild, dangerous moments like this. "Is this the purpose for which I was preserved?" Only the thunder answered, a rolling boom that shook the very stones beneath her feet. The temple prison was a series of cells carved into the base of the cliff, accessible only through a narrow passage guarded day and night. As High Priestess, for Thea had passed beyond the veil the previous winter, leaving Iphigenia to assume her role, she had the authority to visit prisoners before their sacrifice. It was traditional to ask about their lives, their journeys, that the goddess might know whose blood she was receiving. Iphigenia had always used these interviews to offer what small comfort she could to the condemned, a final meal of their choosing, wine to ease their passing, messages to be sent to their families if ever the opportunity arose. It was little enough, but it eased her conscience somewhat, even as she continued to search for a way to end the bloody practice altogether. The two Greeks had been placed in separate cells. She approached the first, where a young man, perhaps 20 years of age, sat huddled on a stone bench. His clothing, though sodden and torn, was finely made. His face, when he raised it to her entrance, was handsome but haggard, with the haunted look of one who had suffered greatly. "What is your name, stranger?" Iphigenia asked in Greek, the language feeling strangely formal on her tongue after so many years of speaking primarily the Taurian dialect. The young man's eyes widened at hearing his native tongue. "You are Greek?" he asked, rising. "Here, in this barbarous place?" "I am the High Priestess of Artemis," she replied, neither confirming nor denying. "It is my duty to prepare you for the goddess." "Prepare me?" A bitter laugh escaped him. "Is that what you call it? I know the customs of this accursed shore. We are to be slaughtered like animals." "Your name," Iphigenia insisted gently. He hesitated, then seemed to deflate, sinking back onto the bench. "What does it matter? The Furies will know it if no one else. I am Orestes, son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra of Mycenae." The world seemed to still around Iphigenia. The roar of the storm outside faded to nothing. All she could hear was the pounding of her own heart. "Orestes," she whispered. Her brother, the infant she had cradled, the toddler whose first steps she had guided, now grown to manhood. It cannot be. He looked at her curiously, perhaps catching something in her tone. "You know the house of Atreus?" How to answer? What to say? That she was his sister, believed dead for 7 years? That fate or the gods or some unimaginable chance had brought him to the one shore in all the world where she waited? "I have heard tales of your family," she managed at last. "Why are you so far from Greece, Orestes of Mycenae? What brings you to this dangerous coast?" His face darkened. "Exile, pursuit, madness. Take your pick, priestess. The gods have not been kind to the house of Atreus these past years." "Tell me," she urged, forgetting for a moment her role, her purpose, everything but the desperate need to know what had become of her family. "What has happened in Mycenae?" Orestes studied her with growing curiosity. "You seem strangely concerned for a foreign priestess." "The goddess wishes to know all about those whose blood will stain her altar," Iphigenia said, recovering herself. "Please, speak freely." Orestes leaned his head back against the damp stone wall. When he spoke, his voice was hollow with remembered pain. "After the fleet sailed for Troy, after my sister Iphigenia was sacrificed at Aulis," the words struck her like physical blows. So that was the tale told in Greece, that she had died that day on the altar. "My mother never forgave my father. For 10 years, while he fought at Troy, she nursed her hatred. And when he returned victorious, she welcomed him with false smiles, drew him a bath, and there, with the help of her lover Aegisthus, she murdered him, cut him down like an ox at slaughter." Iphigenia could not help the small cry that escaped her lips. Her father dead, murdered by her mother. It was unthinkable. "My sister Electra smuggled me away before they could kill me too," Orestes continued, seemingly lost in his own dark recollections. "She sent me to Phocis, where I was raised in safety until I came of age. Then Apollo himself commanded me to return to Mycenae and avenge my father's death." He paused, his hands trembling slightly. "And did you?" Iphigenia whispered. "Yes," he answered, his voice barely audible. "I killed them both. My mother and her lover. I obeyed the god's command." His eyes, when he raised them to hers, were haunted. "And for that matricide, the Furies have pursued me ever since, driving me to madness with their relentless torment." Iphigenia felt as if the ground beneath her feet had given way. Her entire family shattered. Her father murdered by her mother slain by her brother, and now that brother delivered into her hands, destined for sacrifice. "How came you to this shore?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Apollo promised an end to my suffering if I could bring the sacred statue of Artemis from Tauris back to Greece. My friend Pylades and I set sail, but the storm wrecked our ship." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Now it seems I am to die here. My quest unfulfilled, the Furies victorious after all." Iphigenia placed a hand against the wall to steady herself. The visions she had dreamed over the years, the sacred statue, the brother wandering lost, they had been prophecies, not mere dreams. "I must see your companion," she said abruptly. "Wait in hope, Orestes. Perhaps the goddess has plans neither of us yet understands." She left him staring after her in confusion and proceeded to the second cell, where a somewhat older man waited. This, then, must be Pylades, her brother's loyal friend. Their conversation was briefer. Pylades confirmed Orestes' tale, adding details of their wanderings, their desperate attempts to escape the Furies' pursuit. His devotion to her brother was evident in every word. "He is a good man," Pylades insisted. "He did only what the gods commanded, what honour required. If one of us must die, take me and spare him." Such loyalty moved Iphigenia deeply. "I will return before dawn," she promised. "Rest now, and trust in Artemis." Outside the prison, in the relative shelter of a stone alcove, Iphigenia allowed herself a moment of complete emotional collapse. She sank to her knees, tears flowing freely for the first time in years. Her family destroyed, her brother driven to madness by divine torment, and she, unwittingly, now the instrument of his final destruction. "No," she whispered fiercely to the storm, "I will not be the hand that ends the house of Atreus. There must be another way." She remained there, letting the rain mingle with her tears until the strange calm settled over her. Rising, she made her way to the Moonheart, the circular chamber where the eternal flame burned. There, kneeling before the silver-blue fire, she opened herself completely to the presence of Artemis. "Goddess," she prayed, "you saved me from one altar only to bring me to another. You have guided my steps, shaped my days, prepared me for something I could not understand, and now my brother kneels at the edge of your blade. Is this truly your will, to destroy what remains of my family, or is there some deeper purpose to all of this pain?" "Perhaps not," she said. "Tell me, Orestes, would you know your sister Iphigenia if you saw her now, after so many years?" He frowned at the strange question. "Iphigenia died at Olympus. I was a child when she left for what we believed was her wedding. I have only the faintest memories of her. And if I told you she lived, that Artemis took her from that altar and brought her far away to serve as priestess in a distant land." Orestes stared at her, comprehension slowly dawning on his face. "What are you saying?" "Look at me, brother," Iphigenia whispered, stepping closer into the light. "Look with your heart, not just your eyes. Do you not see something familiar in my face? Do you not feel the call of shared blood?" He rose, approaching her cautiously, studying her features with increasing wonder. "It cannot be," he breathed. "Iphigenia?" "Yes," she said, tears threatening again. "It is I, your sister, saved by Artemis and brought to this distant shore. All these years I have served her here, waiting without knowing for what, for whom I waited." "Iphigenia!" With a cry, Orestes embraced her, his earlier suspicion forgotten in the shock of recognition. "The gods are merciful after all, but how? Why? "There is no time to explain everything," she said urgently. "Listen carefully. Apollo sent you for the sacred statue of Artemis, did he not? It stands upon the black altar above. I am the only one permitted to touch it, and I know, that Artemis wishes me to help you take it back to Greece. You would come with us." Hope blazed in his eyes now. "You would leave this place." "Yes, but we must be clever. The Taurians guard their goddess jealously. I have a plan. You must trust me completely." "With my life," Orestes vowed. "Tell me what to do." Iphigenia explained swiftly. She would tell the Taurian king that the sea had polluted the two Greeks, making them unfit for immediate sacrifice. She would claim the need to purify both them and the sacred statue at the sea's edge, away from prying eyes. Once at the shore, they would make their escape in the small fishing boat she knew was hidden in a nearby cove. "It is a desperate plan," Orestes admitted, "but with the gods' favour it might succeed." "Not just the gods' favour," Iphigenia replied with a smile. "My knowledge of this place and your courage. Go now to Pylades and prepare him. I will return at midday with guards to take you to the shore. Remember, until we are safely away, you must play the part of condemned prisoners." With a final embrace she left her brother and made her way to the king's palace in the Taurian settlement. There she presented her case with all the authority of the high priestess, drawing on years of earned respect. "The strangers are polluted by the angry sea," she told King Thoas. "Their sacrifice would only offend the goddess. They must be purified at the shore, and the sacred statue with them, for it too has been tainted by their presence in the temple." The king, a superstitious man who held Iphigenia in particular reverence, agreed without question. "Take whatever guards you need," he offered. "When will the purification be complete?" "By sunset," she replied. "Then the sacrifice can proceed with the goddess's blessing." As promised, at midday she returned to the prison with 4 guards. Orestes and Pylades were led out, their hands bound loosely before them, a precaution she had insisted upon for appearance's sake. Together the small procession made its way down the cliff path to a secluded cove, where waves lapped gently against the sand. "Leave us," Iphigenia commanded the guards. "The ritual requires privacy. Wait beyond those rocks, and do not approach until I call you, or the goddess's wrath will fall upon us all." The guards, well accustomed to the mysterious ways of their priestess, withdrew obediently. As soon as they were out of sight, Iphigenia moved swiftly to untie her brother and his friend. "The boat is hidden in that sea cave," she whispered, pointing. "We must hurry. When the tide turns, our escape will be much more difficult." "What of the statue?" Pylades asked, rubbing his freed wrists. "Here," Iphigenia said, unwrapping a bundle she'd carried down from the temple. Within lay a small wooden figure, ancient and dark with age, depicting Artemis with her bow. The sacred image of the Taurian Artemis. Small is it not to have caused so much bloodshed over the years? Orestes took it reverently. "With this, the oracle promised my torment would end. The Furies would pursue me no more." "Then let us not delay," Iphigenia urged. "The boat awaits." They had nearly reached the sea cave when a shout rang out behind them. Turning, they saw the guards rushing toward them, swords drawn. Their deception had been discovered. "Run!" Iphigenia cried. "To the boat!" They sprinted across the sand, the guards closing the distance with every step. Reaching the cave, they found the small fishing boat just as Iphigenia had promised. Orestes and Pylades pushed it toward the water, while Iphigenia, still clutching the sacred statue, turned to face the pursuing guards. "Stop!" she commanded in her most authoritative voice. "The goddess herself has decreed this escape. Interfere, and her wrath will destroy not just you, but all Taurus." The guards hesitated, their fear of divine punishment briefly outweighing their duty to the king. In that moment of uncertainty, Iphigenia backed toward the boat, which now bobbed in the shallow waves. "Come, priestess," Pylades called. "Quickly!" but before she could reach the boat, the lead guard overcame his fear and lunged forward, grasping for her robe. Iphigenia stumbled backwards, the statue slipping from her grasp and falling into the wet sand. "The image!" Orestes cried in alarm, jumping from the boat to retrieve it. What happened next seemed to unfold in dreamlike slowness. As Orestes bent to snatch up the fallen statue, the guard's sword descended toward his unprotected back. Iphigenia, with no thought for her own safety, threw herself between them. The blade sliced through her robe, drawing a line of fire across her shoulder, but before it could strike deeper, a blinding light erupted from the sacred statue in Orestes' hand. The guards fell back, shielding their eyes. The sea itself seemed to pause in its eternal motion, and standing suddenly on the shore between the mortals was a tall woman garbed in silver, a bow of moonlight in her hands. "Artemis," Iphigenia breathed, sinking to her knees in the wet sand. The goddess's voice, when she spoke, was like the whisper of wind through ancient forests. "Enough blood has been shed in my name on these shores," she declared. "I claim my priestess and my sacred image. They return now to Greece, where a new temple will be built, free from the stain of human sacrifice." The guards prostrated themselves, terror and awe rendering them speechless. Orestes and Pleiades stared in similar shock, unable to comprehend the divine intervention unfolding before them. "My lady," Iphigenia whispered, "I have served you faithfully." "You have," Artemis agreed, her otherworldly gaze softening as it fell upon Iphigenia. "And now your service takes a new form. Go with your brother. Establish my worship in gentler ways in your homeland. The time of blood is ending. A new age approaches." The goddess gestured toward the sea, which suddenly grew calm as a mirror, despite the strengthening wind. "Your path is clear. No storm will trouble your journey home." With these words, the blinding light engulfed Artemis once more, and when it faded, she was gone. In her place, a deer stood momentarily on the shore, regarding them with ancient eyes before bounding away along the beach. "Come," Orestes said gently, helping his sister to her feet. "The goddess has given us our chance. We must not waste it." Dazed but determined, Iphigenia allowed herself to be led to the boat. As they pushed off from shore, the guards remained kneeling in the sand, too overawed by what they had witnessed to attempt further pursuit. The small craft caught the wind and moved swiftly away from the coast of Taurus. Iphigenia stood at the prow, watching the shoreline that had been her home for 7 years recede into the distance. Sorrow mingled with joy in her heart, sorrow for the priestesses she had come to love, for the peaceful life she had built, joy at reunion with her brother, at the prospect of returning to Greece, at the divine confirmation that her path had been right all along. "What will happen in Taurus now?" Pylades asked, coming to stand beside her. "Will they continue the sacrifices without you? Without the statue?" "I don't think so," Iphigenia replied softly. "The goddess has spoken clearly. I believe they will find new ways to honour her, gentler ways. The vision she showed me, it wasn't just for us, it was for them too, a new beginning." Behind them, Orestes carefully secured the sacred statue to the mast. "With this, Apollo promised my torment would end," he said. "Already I feel lighter, as if the Fury's grip on my mind is loosening." "They pursue the guilty," Iphigenia observed. "Perhaps you are guilty no longer in the eyes of the gods, or perhaps you never truly were. You acted as Apollo commanded." "At what cost?" Orestes asked bitterly. "Our entire family destroyed." "Not entirely," Iphigenia reminded him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "I live. You live. Electra lives, I presume." "Yes, she awaits my return in Athens. Then the house of Atreus survives, and perhaps that is enough to break the cycle of bloodshed, to begin anew." As if in answer to her words, the wind freshened, filling their sail and bearing them swiftly across the sea toward Greece, toward home, toward whatever new life awaited them there. The journey from Taurus to Greece took 30 days. 30 days of open skies, of stars that gradually shifted into familiar patterns, of winds that remained mysteriously favourable despite the season. Iphigenia spent the days learning about all that had transpired during her absence. The fall of Troy, her father's ill-fated return, her mother's treachery and death, her sister Electra's steadfast devotion to their father's memory. She never believed you died at Auli, Orestes told her as they sat together one evening watching the sunset paint the waves in gold and crimson. Even when everyone else accepted the story, Electra insisted that Artemis would not have taken you only to destroy you. She kept a small shrine to you in her chambers, with offerings of flowers and small woodland creatures carved from olive wood. Tears pricked at Iphigenia's eyes. Dear Electra, always the strongest of us, in her own way. She will weep with joy to see you, Orestes assured her, as I did. Iphigenia found herself wondering about the land they approached. Will Greece welcome me back? A priestess of Artemis from a foreign shore, bearing strange customs changed by years among another people? You are a princess of Mycenae, Pylades reminded her, joining their conversation. The rightful daughter of Agamemnon, and you bring with you a sacred image that promises healing for Orestes, and through him for Greece itself. How could you not be welcomed? Yet as the coast of Greece appeared on the horizon, a smudge of deeper blue against the sky at first, gradually resolving into the familiar contours of mountains and forests, Iphigenia felt a flutter of apprehension in her chest. She was no longer the innocent girl who had been led to the altar at Aulis, nor was she fully the Taurian priestess she had become. She stood between worlds, belonging fully to neither. I feel as if I am being born for a third time, she confessed to her brother, as they prepared to land. Once from our mother's womb, once on Artemis's altar at Aulis, and now, returning to a homeland that believes me long dead. Orestes squeezed her hand reassuringly. However many times we are born, we remain ourselves at heart. You are still Iphigenia, daughter of Agamemnon. That has never changed. They made landfall near Athens, where Electra had established a small household after fleeing Mycenae following their mother's death. The modest dwelling stood on a hillside overlooking the city, surrounded by olive groves and cypress trees. As they approached on foot, Iphigenia's heart raced with anticipation. It was Electra herself who came to the door at their knock, a woman now, not the girl Iphigenia remembered, but with the same direct gaze, the same proud bearing. She saw Orestes first, her face lighting with relief. "Brother, you've returned! The oracle's instruction was true then. You found—" She stopped abruptly, her eyes fixing on Iphigenia, widening with disbelief. "It cannot be," Electra whispered. "It is," Orestes said gently. "Our sister lives. Artemis saved her at Aulis and took her to Tauris, where she has served as priestess all these years. The statue I was sent to retrieve was in her keeping." "Iphigenia?" Electra's voice trembled with suppressed emotion. "Is it truly you?" Iphigenia stepped forward, taking her sister's hands in her own. "It is, dear one, though changed as you are changed. The gods have granted us a second chance, all of us." With a sob, Electra threw her arms around Iphigenia, crushing her in an embrace that spoke more eloquently than words ever could of years of grief and longing, of prayers uttered into darkness, of faith rewarded against all odds. The sisters clung to each other, weeping freely, while Orestes and Pylades stood by in respectful silence. "At what cost?" Orestes asked bitterly. "Our entire family destroyed." "Not entirely," Iphigenia reminded him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "I live. You live. Electra lives, I presume." "Yes, she awaits my return in Athens. Then the house of Atreus survives, and perhaps that is enough, to break the cycle of bloodshed, to begin anew." As if in answer to her words, the wind freshened, filling their sail and bearing them swiftly across the sea toward Greece, toward home, toward whatever new life awaited them there. The journey from Taurus to Greece took 30 days. 30 days of open skies, of stars that gradually shifted into familiar patterns, of winds that remained mysteriously favourable despite the season. Iphigenia spent the days learning about all that had transpired during her absence. The fall of Troy, her father's ill-fated return, her mother's treachery and death, her sister Electra's steadfast devotion to their father's memory. She never believed you died at Auli, Orestes told her as they sat together one evening watching the sunset paint the waves in gold and crimson. Even when everyone else accepted the story, Electra insisted that Artemis would not have taken you only to destroy you. She kept a small shrine to you in her chambers, with offerings of flowers and small woodland creatures carved from olive wood. Tears pricked at Iphigenia's eyes. Dear Electra, always the strongest of us, in her own way. She will weep with joy to see you, Orestes assured her, as I did. Iphigenia found herself wondering about the land they approached. Will Greece welcome me back? A priestess of Artemis from a foreign shore, bearing strange customs changed by years among another people? You are a princess of Mycenae, Pylades reminded her, joining their conversation. The rightful daughter of Agamemnon, and you bring with you a sacred image that promises healing for Orestes, and through him for Greece itself. How could you not be welcomed? Yet as the coast of Greece appeared on the horizon, a smudge of deeper blue against the sky at first, gradually resolving into the familiar contours of mountains and forests, Iphigenia felt a flutter of apprehension in her chest. She was no longer the innocent girl who had been led to the altar at Aulis, nor was she fully the Taurian priestess she had become. She stood between worlds, belonging fully to neither. I feel as if I am being born for a third time, she confessed to her brother, as they prepared to land. Once from our mother's womb, once on Artemis's altar at Aulis, and now, returning to a homeland that believes me long dead. Orestes squeezed her hand reassuringly. However many times we are born, we remain ourselves at heart. You are still Iphigenia, daughter of Agamemnon. That has never changed. They made landfall near Athens, where Electra had established a small household after fleeing Mycenae following their mother's death. The modest dwelling stood on a hillside overlooking the city, surrounded by olive groves and cypress trees. As they approached on foot, Iphigenia's heart raced with anticipation. It was Electra herself who came to the door at their knock. A woman now, not the girl Iphigenia remembered, but with the same direct gaze, the same proud bearing. She saw Orestes first, her face lighting with relief. "Brother, you've returned! The oracle's instruction was true then. You found—" She stopped abruptly, her eyes fixing on Iphigenia, widening with disbelief. "It cannot be," Electra whispered. "It is," Orestes said gently. "Our sister lives. Artemis saved her at Aulis and took her to Taurus, where she has served as priestess all these years. The statue I was sent to retrieve was in her keeping." "Iphigenia?" Electra's voice trembled with suppressed emotion. "Is it truly you?" Iphigenia stepped forward, taking her sister's hands in her own. "It is, dear one, though changed as you are changed. The gods have granted us a second chance, all of us." With a sob, Electra threw her arms around Iphigenia, crushing her in an embrace that spoke more eloquently than words ever could of years of grief and longing, of prayers uttered into darkness, of faith rewarded against all odds. The sisters clung to each other, weeping freely, while Orestes and Pylades stood by in respectful silence. That night, by the hearth fire in Electra's home, they spoke long into the darkness. Iphigenia related her experiences in Taurus, the strange customs, the blood sacrifices she had resisted, the gradual understanding she had developed of Artemis's true nature beneath the various faces humans had given her. "She is not cruel, Iphigenia insisted, neither in her Greek aspect nor her Taurian one. She is wild, yes, and demanding, but there is purpose in her harshness. She tests us, shapes us like a sculptor shapes clay, removing what is unnecessary to reveal what endures. And what endures? Electra asked, leaning out forward. Iphigenia smiled. Love, courage, the bonds of family and friendship that even death cannot sever. These are the things that remain when all else falls away. In the days that followed, word spread of Iphigenia's miraculous return. Pilgrims began arriving at Electra's home, seeking glimpses of the priestess who had returned from the land of barbarians with Artemis's sacred image. Some came merely out of curiosity, others seeking healing or blessing. Iphigenia received them all with quiet dignity. She spoke of her experiences not as one recounting exotic adventures, but as a priestess sharing sacred wisdom. She told of the different faces of Artemis, the Greek huntress, the Taurian blood drinker, and the true goddess beneath all human understanding who had appeared on the shore that day to sanction their escape. The gods do not change, she would say. It is our vision of them that changes as we ourselves grow and learn. Meanwhile, Orestes found that the furies which had tormented him since his mother's death had indeed retreated. The madness that had driven him across the sea had lifted, leaving behind a profound clarity. With Pylades' support and his sister's love, he began the process of reclaiming his birthright as king of Mycenae. It was Orestes who commissioned the new temple to Artemis that the goddess had demanded. On a wooded hillside outside Athens, where deer ran free and the moon cast silver shadows through ancient oaks, the sacred building took shape, different from both Greek and Taurian traditions, yet honouring the essence of both. At its heart stood the statue from Taurus, no longer demanding blood but still radiating power and mystery. Iphigenia became its first priestess, establishing rites that blended the best of what she had learned in both lands. Young women came to be initiated into the mysteries of the goddess, to learn the balance of wildness and wisdom, freedom and responsibility that Artemis represented. No more blood, Iphigenia decreed. The goddess accepts instead the offering of service, to protect her creatures, to guard her forests, to honour the cycles of the moon and seasons. And once a year, to commemorate my journey, a deer will be set free rather than sacrificed, to run in Artemis's forests as her living embodiment. Seasons passed. Years turned. The temple of Artemis flourished under Iphigenia's guidance. Orestes ruled wisely in Mycenae, with Pylades as his most trusted advisor. Electra, finding peace at last in the reunion of her shattered family, became a skilled healer, combining Greek medicine with wisdom Iphigenia had brought from Taurus. The tale of Iphigenia's sacrifice at Aulis, her rescue by Artemis, her years in Taurus, and her eventual return to Greece became a favourite of poets and storytellers. But as often happens with tales told and retold, details changed. Some versions claimed she had died at Aulis after all, the deer merely a symbol of her spirit taken by the goddess. Others insisted she remained in Taurus forever, becoming one with the foreign deity she served. Still others ended the story at her rescue from the altar, leaving her subsequent fate a mystery. Iphigenia listened to these variations with a smile, understanding that myths, like gods, wore different faces according to the needs of those who told them. The truth of her life, the pain and the joy, the losses and discoveries, the quiet courage that had sustained her through it all, that remained her own, a sacred mystery as profound as the goddess herself. In the final years of her life, when her hair had turned as silver as moonlight and her face bore the gentle lines of a life fully lived, Iphigenia often sat beneath the great oak that shaded the temple courtyard. There, she would write upon scrolls the true account of her journey, not for fame or recognition, but as an offering to Artemis and to those who might come after her, seeking their own path through the labyrinth of divine and human purposes. I was meant to die at Aulis, she wrote, and in a way, I did. The innocent girl who walked to that altar never truly returned, but death is not the end of the story, not for me. not for anyone who serves the deeper truths of existence. It is merely a doorway to another form of being. On the last night of her life, with the full moon casting its silver light through the temple windows, Iphigenia dreamed once more of Artemis. The goddess appeared not as the stern huntress or the blood-hungry deity of Taurus, but as a woman of ageless beauty, extending a hand in invitation. "You have served well," Artemis said in the dream. "The cycle is complete. It is time to join my eternal hunt among the stars." When the youngest priestess came to wake her the following morning, she found Iphigenia sitting peacefully in her chair, a finished scroll upon her lap, her eyes closed as if in gentle sleep. But her spirit had already departed, following the sound of distant hunting horns into the forests of eternity. They buried her beneath the great oak, marking the spot with a simple stone carving of a deer. And on certain nights, when the moon is full and the wind whispers through the ancient trees, it is said that a woman can be glimpsed running with the woodland creatures, free at last, wild and joyful, restored to her truest self in the eternal company of her goddess. So ends the tale of Iphigenia, daughter of Agamemnon, priestess of Artemis, whose life was not sacrificed but transformed, a reminder that what appears to be an ending may in truth be a beginning, and that even in the darkest moments of our lives, forces beyond our understanding may be weaving patterns of meaning and redemption too vast for mortal minds to comprehend. In the age before stars, when gods were still young, so begins the oldest ballad passed down by ancient bards, who once performed in firelit halls echoing with laughter and fear. In those primordial days, the newly formed world was a land of shifting wonders. Mountains rose as if startled from slumber, and rivers carved their way through stone to find the sea. In this time of awe, the Sky Father looked upon the mortal realm and found it cloaked in a gloom, that weighed on every living soul. Yearning to pierce this darkness, he ignited a piece of the cosmic furnace at the heart of creation and placed it upon the highest peak. So was born the flame of Theiros. Older than memory, more potent than any flickering torch, the flame shimmered in unsettling hues of gold, crimson and sapphire, as if it contained the entire spectrum of the cosmos. Legends claim that anyone who touched it would receive divine knowledge. But such a gift was not granted lightly, for the flame was as much a trial as it was a blessing. It was said that only one mortal soul in each age could truly seek its fire. Those who approached without that sacred calling found themselves scorched, hollowed out, and transformed into statues of glimmering glass. Through these centuries, stories of heroes, villains, and fools alike circulated, each tale a testament to the flame's awe-inspiring power. For many generations, mortals pondered why the Skyfather had chosen to set such a demanding test. Was it a reward to the humble, a lure for the ambitious, or a punishment for the prideful? Depending on the teller, the flame of Theiros was either a beacon of salvation or a herald of doom. Mothers warned reckless children not to dream too grandly, while wandering minstrels sang songs of souls who dared to climb Mount Kereth in search of the fire, only to vanish in a final agonized flash. Kings and queens, hearing of the flame's promise, often dispatched their bravest knights, yet those warriors returned as silent shards, reflecting the sorrow of their unworthiness. Still, the legend endured that once in every age, one mortal could withstand the flame's trial. Such a seeker would inherit not just knowledge, but also the power to shape destiny for good or ill. This possibility ignited countless aspirations. Many saw the flame as a path to immortality, others saw it as a portal to ultimate rule. Yet the curse that shadowed the gift remained. Hubris would be burned away, as would any ambition that placed personal gain above the greater balance. In this precarious dance between divine insight and mortal folly, few dared to tread. Within the realm's annals stood testimonies of a handful who did survive. One legend told of Althea the healer, who cradled the flame in her hands and brought healing arts to her entire kingdom. Another rumour spoke of Varus the tyrant, who seized the flame and unleashed wars of annihilation, until the fire spirit turned its wrath upon him. Whether these tales were truth or mere cautionary fables, no one could say for certain. What all accounts agreed upon was the presence of the mysterious guardian, Theiros, an entity whose form and purpose transcended mortal comprehension. Theiros, the ancient spirit embodying the eternal flame, manifested differently depending on the seeker's heart. Some beheld a regal stag wreathed in blazing antlers, hooves striking sparks upon the ground. Others glimpsed a swirling tempest of embers that spoke with crackling thunder. Yet there were those with gentler hearts who saw a glowing child radiant with innocence. Theiros was neither inherently benevolent nor malevolent. It existed as a balance, a test, and a mirror to human souls. In some obscure texts, Theiros was described as the very voice of the Skyfather, an emissary meant to reveal the sincerity or deception in all who approached the flame. But despite these stories, centuries passed where no champion emerged to claim the gift. The mortal realm fell into a routine of common struggles and fleeting triumphs, wars that erupted over land and pride, alliances formed out of desperation, and heroes celebrated in the wake of conflict. The flame of Theiros, perched upon the mist-shrouded summit of Mount Kereth, became a remote legend that few dared to believe might still be real. Traders spoke of the mountain in hushed tones, describing how, on moonless nights, one could see a faint shimmer on its peak, a scintilla of light that flickered like a heart's steady pulse. At the foothills of distant mountains, in a small village mostly unremarkable to kings and lords, lived a blacksmith named Caelan. He was young, though his strong arms and soot-stained cheeks spoke of countless hours forging steel. Known for crafting tools and occasionally the finer swords demanded by local knights, Caelan nursed a secret ambition: Though he hammered weapons for war, he despised their purpose. Each clang of metal on metal resonated in his chest as a reluctant drumbeat to conflict, a cry that he yearned to silence. But what could a single smith do to quell the endless cycle of violence? Caelan's mother had once told him stories of the flame of Theros, recounting the same myths that enthralled wandering minstrels. As a child, he thought them mere fables, yet a restless spirit always stirred inside him, sparked by a desire to do more than just arm men for bloody battles. Night after night he gazed into the heart of his forge's fire, imagining it held the same cosmic brilliance as the legendary flame on Mount Careth. With each sword he shaped, he contemplated how that metal might serve to protect rather than destroy. One fateful evening, as Caelan dozed by the dying embers of his forge, he found himself enshrouded in a vivid dream. He saw the silhouette of a colossal stag, outlined in swirling fire. Sparks drifted around the creature like stars in a crimson sky. When he tried to move closer, his dream vision shifted, and the stag was gone, replaced by the image of a pale child who spoke without moving lips. "Seek the flame of Theros," the child's voice echoed in Caelan's mind, carrying an urgency he could not ignore. A sensation like molten metal pouring into his veins jolted him awake. In that moment, Caelan knew he had been given a sign. When dawn broke, he was determined to depart. Close friends and neighbours urged him to abandon this mad quest, warning him that even kings with their retinues of warriors had perished on Mount Careth. If those mighty ones failed, an old villager cautioned, how could a mere blacksmith hope to succeed? Despite their concerns, Caelan remained resolute. He sensed that the dream was more than a fancy of the sleeping mind. Something within the flicker of that fiery stag had spoken to his deepest longing, to end the bloodshed that stained the land. Admittedly, fear gnawed at him. The stories of men being transformed into glass effigies haunted his thoughts. Yet something stronger than fear propelled him forward. Hope. He took only what he deemed essential, a pouch of water, his trusted hammer, and a small pendant his mother had given him when he was a child. Fashioned into the shape of a tiny leaf, the pendant was said to represent renewal and the cycle of life. It was a humble talisman, but it gave him courage. Thus, Caelan set forth on a path that countless others had trod, though few returned. With each step he felt as if invisible flames licked at his heels, urging him onward. The early morning sun rose behind him, casting his shadow long across the dusty road that stretched to the horizon. In his heart the memory of the dream still smouldered, a promise that if he reached the summit, he might learn how to forge a blade that could sever war itself. Little did he know that a far greater power was already stirring from its slumber. Far to the north, in an opulent palace wreathed in the banners of a mighty empire, Queen Neria stirred from her own dream. Hers was not a vision of peace, but a prophecy of dominion. Soon, she too would set her sights on Mount Careth, igniting a chain of events that would test Caelan's resolve, reveal the nature of Theros, and decide the destiny of all. For whether through pure intent or ravenous greed, the flame of Theros called to those fated to seek it. Thus ended the quiet days of a humble blacksmith. The storm that would shape an era had only just begun to gather on the horizon. A single question burned in the wind. Who would be judged worthy when at last they stood before the flame? Stay with us for part 2 of The Flame of Theros, as Caelan takes the first steps of his perilous ascent, driven by a hope unlike any the realm has seen. The journey has commenced, and the eternal fire waits. Caelan's boots struck the well-trodden road with a steady rhythm as he ventured away from the only home he had ever known. Though he was no knight, no famed adventurer, he carried within him an unshakable resolve. A battered cloak was draped across his shoulders, fluttering in the cool breeze of early morning, and his blacksmith's hammer hung at his belt, a comforting weight. Word of his quest had spread quickly among the villagers, and their voices echoed in his memory. Warnings. concerns, and a handful of hushed blessings. On the second day of his journey, Caelan encountered a travelling merchant pushing a creaky cart. The merchant, an elderly man with eyes as sharp as a falcon's, paused when he saw Caelan's determined expression. "You have the look of a man with a cause," the merchant observed, tapping a curved staff on the ground. Caelan simply nodded and admitted he sought Mount Careth. The merchant's face darkened. "Folly to chase the flame," he muttered. "I've seen the glass husks of the proud, but if your heart is set, there's little I can say." He rummaged through his cart and offered a small pouch of dried fruit and herbs, saying it might serve as some comfort on the perilous path. Caelan, grateful, took it and continued on his way. As the days wore on, he began to sense a shifting in the air itself. Subtle changes announced that the land of a legend drew closer. The wind carried whispers like half-forgotten songs, and the horizon was tinged with a luminous haze at dawn and dusk. On the 5th day, Caelan beheld the first view of Mount Careth, a colossal peak rising like an ancient sentinel. Its summit was cloaked in swirling clouds that glowed strangely even under the midday sun. Whether those clouds harboured lightning or magical forces was unclear, but Caelan felt certain that the flame of Theros lay somewhere beyond them. Villages near the mountain brimmed with rumours. Some locals insisted that they had seen phantom lights dancing atop the peaks, while others told stories of monstrous guardians. But the name that recurred was Theros, spoken in hushed tones. "Theros hunts those who come with ill intent," a grizzled hunter claimed while sharpening his arrows. "Mark my words, if you make it to the mountain's heart, you'll face a spirit that sees into your soul." Caelan thanked the hunter for his advice, though unease tugged at the edges of his mind. He recalled the vision from his dream, how the fiery stag's eyes seemed to pierce him with gentle but unyielding scrutiny. At last, after 2 weeks of steady travel, Caelan arrived at the base of Mount Careth. Snow dusted the higher elevations, while thick fir trees clustered near the foothills, their branches laden with frost even in the mild season. A narrow path led upward through craggy outcroppings and dense underbrush. The first step felt monumental, an echo of every folk tale about intrepid heroes or foolish wanderers who dared climb these slopes. Wind rattled the needles on the firs, producing a sound like whispers urging him to turn back. But he moved forward, each step a quiet statement of will. Before long, the ascending trail opened into a wide valley known as the Echoing Wind. According to rumour, this was the place that tested one's resolve through intangible voices. As Caelan ventured into this valley, the wind intensified, howling between jagged rocks. It was not long before he heard it, faint at first, then growing more distinct, as if countless voices called his name. They were the voices of people he knew, family, friends, even the blacksmiths he had trained under. Some voices pleaded for his return, some mocked his quest, and others wept in sorrow. He paused, heart hammering. The swirling gale carried these echoes all around, and it was almost impossible to discern direction. Fear clawed at Caelan's chest. The urge to flee was overwhelming. The illusions whispered of imminent danger, painting visions in his mind of him failing, burned to nothing by the hustless flame. But he recalled the dream, the unwavering eyes of that fiery stag, and the vow he had made to himself, to end the cycle of bloodshed. Mustering his courage, he continued through the storm of voices. He spoke aloud. "I walk this path by choice. My heart is set on forging peace." Though the howling did not cease, a subtle shift occurred. The voices lost their stranglehold on his mind. Step by step, Caelan emerged from the valley. Though the wind still carried whispers, they no longer held sway over him. Beyond the echoing wind stood a breathtaking sight, the lake of still glass, its surface reflecting the sky like a flawless mirror. An otherworldly hush settled here, Even the wind seemed reluctant to stir the waters. Kaelin approached the shore carefully. Legends describe this lake as a gateway to self-reflection, quite literally, if rumours of mysterious visions were true. As he knelt by the water's edge to fill his flask, he noticed his reflection wavering in the ripples. But something was off. Instead of seeing himself as he was, a tired traveller, face smudged by dust and wear, he beheld a figure clad in ornate robes, crowned and wielding a sword of flame. This mirrored Kaelin gazed back at him with an air of haughty pride. With a chill, he realised the reflection was a vision of arrogance, a future self who might claim the flame for dominion rather than peace. Shock made him stumble backward. The surface of the lake shimmered, revealing flickering images, armies bowing, kingdoms trembling at his feet, a world shaped by Kaelin's single will. The illusions promised him glory and reverence. If only he would seize power. For a moment, temptation coiled in his chest like a serpent. What if he could truly end war by ruling all? The voice in his mind, sweet and insidious, suggested that peace might be easier to enforce if he became an absolute monarch. But Kaelin recalled his true purpose, to end conflict without resorting to tyranny. With steady breath, he placed his hand against the water. "I deny this vision," he said. "I do not seek to rule, I seek to protect." The reflection blurred and then reverted to his true image, a simple blacksmith, with determination rather than arrogance burning in his eyes. The lake of still glass fell silent once more, and Kaelin sensed that he had passed a second trial, yet he knew not what other perils lay ahead. He skirted the lake, continuing to climb the winding mountain paths. The air grew thinner, and the temperature dropped, but a strange warmth flickered in his chest. It was as if the recollection of his dream fueled him, lending strength to limbs that should have been exhausted. Late in the afternoon he reached a small clearing, where twisted pines grew out of bare rock. Here he would rest for the night. Evening fell swiftly, and Kaelin gathered wood to build a modest fire. He reflected on the trials he had endured, the echoing wind that preyed on fear, and the lake of still glass that laid bare latent pride. Both were illusions of the mind, yet they felt hauntingly real. He wondered if the final test would be more tangible, more dangerous. The flame crackled, casting fleeting shadows on the ancient stones. In their flicker, Kaelin imagined shapes. Could one be Theros' stag leaping across the darkness? The night was silent save for the murmur of wind and the hiss of embers. Far below, lights glimmered from distant towns unaware of the struggles on this mountain. As he stared at those specks of civilization, Kaelin felt the enormity of his mission. He was just one man against ancient forces, but perhaps that was exactly why he might succeed. Prideful armies and mighty kings had tried and failed. Maybe humility offered a path they never saw. With this thought in mind, he let sleep take him, trusting that the morning sun would reveal the way forward. Little did he know that an imperial convoy had already begun to chart a route up the mountain. Queen Neria herself was en route, carried by a palanquin adorned with gold filigree, her retinue bristling with steel. She had no intention of bowing before illusions. Where Kaelin walked gently, she would march with unwavering resolve, intent on bending the flame to her will. Before the week was out, Kaelin and Neria's paths would intersect in a confrontation that would decide the fate of the flame of Theros and all those living under its cosmic glow. In the dawn's first light, Kaelin awoke to the crisp air and the crunch of frost underfoot. He stamped his feet to restore circulation, quickly gathered his sparse belongings, and resumed the ascent. The path narrowed further, revealing ragged cliffs and icy ledges, all leading toward the summit where the flame of Theros awaited. His breath condensed in the cold mountain air, and he was acutely aware that each step took him closer to the flame, but also deeper into the heart of its trials. Late that morning he arrived at a plateau strewn with blackened rocks. The ground bore scorch marks, as though a great inferno had once raged here. A faint odour of ash clung to the thin air, making Kaelin's stomach tighten with apprehension. He had been forewarned of the final elemental guardian known as the Beast Without Fire, a living mass of smoke and cinders, rumoured to drain the warmth from living beings. Many a legend told of warriors who had thrown themselves at this beast's mercy, only to be reduced to brittle husks. Still, the path to the summit ran through its lair. Kaelin steeled himself, hammer in hand, fully aware that brute force might not suffice. A rumble shuddered through the rocks, and from the blackened ground rose a shape that at first appeared amorphous. Billowing clouds of smoke twisted and coiled, gradually coalescing into a hulking creature with hollow, ember-like eyes. The Beast Without Fire exhaled a gust of choking fumes, as if challenging Kaelin to approach. For a moment Kaelin hesitated. Could he truly face such a monstrous apparition, armed with little more than courage and a smith's hammer? The beast lunged, swiping a smoky claw that left a trail of cinders in its wake. Kaelin dodged to the side, heart pounding. He swung his hammer in a desperate arc, and though it passed through the creature's swirling form, the blow had little effect. The creature roared, a hollow, echoing sound, and advanced again. It became clear that typical combat was useless. The creature was not solid enough to be struck down by mere steel. Recalling the trials he had already overcome, Kaelin reasoned that each challenge tested an aspect of his spirit. The echoing wind tested his courage to press on despite fear. The lake of still glass tested his humility in the face of temptation. Now, confronting the Beast Without Fire, perhaps he needed to demonstrate something else, the willingness to surrender, to sacrifice. Clutching the pendant around his neck, he knelt. The action felt natural, as though guided by an unseen hand. He laid his hammer on the ground, arms extended, showing no aggression. The Beast Without Fire paused, smoky limbs hovering in mid-attack. Its ember eyes flickered uncertainly. Kaelin bowed his head. "I do not come to conquer," he said softly, "but to learn. I surrender my pride and my weapons." Tension crackled in the air as the beast loomed above him. For what felt like an eternity, neither moved. Then slowly the swirling smoke receded. The beast's form became smaller, as if shrinking into itself. Finally, with a final swirl of ash, it dissipated entirely, leaving only a scattering of faintly glowing embers upon the blackened ground. Kaelin exhaled a shaky breath, realizing he had passed the third trial. He retrieved his hammer, but did not hoist it in triumph. Instead, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. Every step of this pilgrimage had demanded he relinquish some fragment of vanity or fear. The trials were not about defeating foes in battle, but about purifying the intent that burned in his soul. With the Beast Without Fire vanquished, the path to the summit lay open. He pressed on, the air growing colder as the day wore on, though a warmth smouldered in his chest. Before nightfall, Kaelin reached a narrow ridge that edged along a sheer cliff. From this vantage point he glimpsed the peak of Mount Kareth, an expanse of rock and ice crowned by a pulsating glow. Although distant, it cast dancing hues against the sky, a silent testament that the flame of Theros indeed burned beyond mortal comprehension. Yet as he inched along the precarious path, Kaelin's eyes were drawn to a glimmer of torchlight far below. A line of soldiers ascended a different route, their armour catching the dying sunlight. At the head of this procession, carried in a luxurious palanquin, was Queen Nerea. She wore robes of black and gold, her hair braided with gemstones. Even at this distance, Kaelin sensed her aura of commanding authority. Seeing her host, he felt a pang of alarm. Rumour held that Queen Nerea was a woman of unyielding ambition, rumoured to silence or banish all who dared question her. Why did she seek the flame now? The answer was as clear as any: the pursuit of power, or perhaps the ability to shape prophecy to her will. A chill ran through Kaelin, not just from the cold wind, but from the possibility that the Queen's arrival might spell peril for the realms below. With urgency igniting his steps, Kaelin navigated the final stretch of the ridge. He slipped once on loose gravel, nearly tumbling over the edge, but caught himself against a boulder. Panting, he pressed on, determined to reach the summit before night claimed the sky. Eventually, the path levelled out into a wide plateau strewn with pale stones that glowed faintly. An unnatural hush reigned, as though the world itself held its breath in the presence of something sacred. At the far side of the plateau stood a towering arch of black rock, through which Kaelin could see the flicker of brilliant light. Kaelin stepped under the arch, and there it was, the flame of Theros. Set in a natural basin of smooth stone, the flame soared several feet high, dancing in colours no mortal forge could replicate, shifting from deep crimson at the base to radiant azure at its apex. The surrounding air shimmered, bending reality like a mirage in the desert. Gazing upon the flame felt like peering into creation's very heart. A wave of awe and reverence washed over Kaelin, and he found himself momentarily breathless. He glanced around for any sign of Theros, the mysterious spirit said to judge all who approached. Yet the only immediate sign of movement was the flame itself, gracefully swaying as though acknowledging Kaelin's presence. With tentative steps, he moved closer. Heat emanated outward, but it was not the scorching burn of an ordinary blaze. Instead, it felt strangely inviting, like standing in a warm hearth on a winter's night. Still he was wary, for many had been reduced to glass in its presence. An unexpected voice, soft as a whisper yet resonant as thunder, spoke behind him. "Do you truly know what you seek?" Kaelin spun around to see a figure enveloped in an ethereal radiance. At first it resembled a child wreathed in luminous flickers, but its features were indistinct, shifting like molten metal. "Theros," Kaelin breathed. He sank to one knee out of reverence, though he sensed that such formality might be needless. The entity circled him, embers trailing in the air. "I see your journey has tested more than your strength," Theros said. The voice chimed with multiple tones, like a chorus merged into one. "Speak plainly. For what reason have you come?" Kaelin's thoughts tumbled, but he mustered the honesty he had guarded so carefully throughout this quest. "My hands have shaped weapons that wrought pain," he said. "I come seeking the power to forge a sword that can protect without slaughter, to end war, if such a thing is possible." A moment's silence passed, and then the spirit took on a new shape, a regal stag with a coat of living flame. Towering above Kaelin, it stepped nearer, lowering its enormous antlers. Kaelin saw entire galaxies of sparks flit within the stag's burning eyes. "Many have craved this flame for dominion," Theros spoke in a deep, sonorous tone. "Others for immortality. Few seek it to heal." The stag's eyes narrowed. "The words alone cannot hide your deeper self. Remain as you are, humble and unafraid of truth, or you will be undone." Before Kaelin could respond, the archway behind him erupted in a clamour of boots and shouts. Queen Neria had arrived, flanked by soldiers bearing torches and gleaming spears. Their light was insignificant compared to the radiant blaze in the basin. The queen dismounted from her palanquin, stepping onto the plateau with the confident stride of someone who believed the entire world bent to her will. She surveyed the scene, Kaelin kneeling near the eternal flame, and Theros in the form of a towering stag. Her lips curved into a measured smile. "I see I am not the first to arrive," she said, voice echoing in the still air. "No matter. Step aside, blacksmith, if you value your life." Neria's gaze flicked toward the flame, her eyes glittering with the hunger of ambition. "I have come for this power. The prophecy is mine to shape." Kaelin rose. "My queen," he began, voice trembling with a mix of fear and indignation. "This flame is not to be taken by force. It answers to purity of intent, not claims of authority." Her laughter rang hollow, as cold as the winds that scoured the upper peaks. "Purity?" She raised a hand, and her guards formed a tight semicircle. "Purity is a child's delusion. power is what rules this world, and fate yields to the one who wields the strongest arm. The stag's fiery gaze flicked between Kaelin and the Queen. The plateau seemed charged with energy, a tension that was seconds away from erupting. Thyros's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Know you stand on sacred ground, mortal Queen. Approach with reverence, or be consumed." Yet in Neria's eyes, reverence was absent, only triumph laced with a spark of defiance. Even as Kaelin struggled to find words that might dissuade her, he realised they would fall on ears deafened by ambition. The final test was about to unfold, and there would be no easy outcome. The flame flickered higher, as if bracing for the turmoil about to be unleashed in its domain. A hushed stillness clung to the plateau, as if even the wind held its breath. Both Kaelin and Queen Nerea faced the living flame, while Thyros, manifested as a colossal burning stag, stood watchful between them. In the circle of soldiers surrounding the scene, tension rolled like thunderheads. One false move and violence would descend upon this sacred ground. With a deliberate step forward, the Queen raised her chin. "Spirit of the eternal flame," she called, addressing Thyros directly. "I stand before you as Queen Nerea, ruler of the Four Realms. My lineage is of kings and conquerors. I demand your power to shape destiny itself." Her voice resounded with unshakable authority, but a faint tremor lay beneath, perhaps from the raw energy emanating from the flame. Thyros turned its fierce gaze upon her, embers swirling in its eyes. "You demand what is not yours to command," it replied in a voice that reverberated through the air. "Such arrogance has been tested before." Even the stag's stance conveyed an ancient weariness, as if it had witnessed countless such confrontations. You come to the flame with pride blazing in your heart. Beware, the flame is no mere tool. Kaelin's pulse hammered as he watched the Queen's expression darken. "We shall see who masters whom," she spat, beckoning one of her sorcerers forward. A cloaked figure approached, staff in hand, chanting words from a language older than kingdoms. The staff's tip glowed with a sickly green light, and an arcane force crackled across the plateau, colliding with the flame's radiant aura. It was an audacious attempt to bind or channel the flame's power. Thyros roared, a sound both animalistic and cosmic. Waves of heat pulsed outward. The soldiers recoiled, shields raised, while Nerea's sorcerer staggered under the surge of raw energy. The green glow sputtered, threatening to extinguish. "Fool!" thundered Thyros, stamping its flaming hooves. "No mortal magic can subdue the cosmic spark of creation." Sparks ignited the air in violent bursts. Sensing imminent chaos, Kaelin sprang forward, placing himself between the Queen's forces and the flame. "Stop this!" he pleaded, hammer trembling in his grasp. "The flame of Thyros cannot be conquered by force. It is a gift, not a prize. If you press on, you will be undone, just as so many were before you." Queen Nerea cast him a withering glare. "You dare instruct a queen? Stand aside, blacksmith, lest I shatter your bones where you stand." With a flourish of her hand, a trio of armoured knights advanced on Kaelin, swords drawn. The blacksmith gripped his hammer, uncertain whether the ideals that had carried him here would survive a clash of steel. Before he could even think of defending himself, the ground quaked. The flame of Thyros surged higher, unleashing a scorching burst of energy that forced everyone to shield their eyes. From within that dazzling brilliance stepped another form of Thyros. Gone was the stag. In its place stood a child bathed in shifting firelight. Clad in a simple tunic that glowed as though woven from embers, this fiery child held up a small hand. Instantly the knights halted, their blades rattling as if weighed down by an unseen force. "Spill no blood on this plateau," the child's voice intoned. Though softly spoken, it carried a finality that froze every warrior in place. Kalen stared, heart pounding. He wondered if this gentle facade concealed the spirit's full might. Clearly it did. He saw the queen's eyes narrow, frustration warring with awe. Whatever she had expected to face atop this mountain, it was not an entity that could shift forms so freely. The flaming child turned to Kalen, gaze solemn. "You came in humility. Sit now in the presence of one who craves dominion. Share your truth." As it spoke, sparks drifted around its small figure, dancing like fireflies against the evening sky. Taking a breath to steady himself, Kalen lowered his hammer. He felt the combined weight of centuries pressing down on him, the hopes of those who had yearned for an end to war, the warnings of elders who spoke of glassy husks. Still, he stood firm. "I have no desire to reign," he said, voice unwavering. "I only wish to forge a blade that can protect without furthering the cycle of bloodshed. Let me be worthy of this flame so I can bring peace to my people." Silence descended. Queen Neria's features hardened, as though she could barely contain her disgust at the notion of relinquishing power. She stepped forward again. "You are a simple-minded dreamer, blacksmith. Peace is shaped by conquest, by forcing chaos to submit. If the gods themselves wish to stand in my path, let them tremble." She extended her hand toward the flame, eyes ablaze with fervour. In that instant, Thyros's childlike face reflected immeasurable sorrow. The flames around the basin pulsed with white-hot intensity, as if they had recognised something irredeemable in the queen's heart. Even Kalen could sense an unimaginable tension crackling in the air. Time itself seemed to slow. The queen's outstretched fingers neared the flame, and every soldier watched in rapt horror, uncertain whether she would triumph or be destroyed. With a desperate cry, Kalen lunged forward, aiming to pull the queen back from the brink. He managed to seize her wrist an instant before it could plunge into the writhing blaze. The contact seared Kalen's flesh, and he yelped in pain, but he refused to let go. "You don't understand," he rasped. "This is no mortal fire." Queen Neria wrenched her arm free. In that split second, the flame flickered wildly, as if revealing a fragment of her soul to all present. In the roiling light, Kalen glimpsed a vision of a young girl, Neria in her youth, cowering in a cold palace where older kings belittled her, scoffing that a queen could never hold the same power as a king. He saw her vow to seize control, to never again stand helpless. Then the vision dissipated, replaced by the adult queen's blazing ambition. "Enough of this!" she shouted, her voice cracking. The queen thrust both hands into the flame. The plateau erupted in a blinding flare of colour. Soldiers cried out, stumbling backward as wave after wave of oppressive heat washed over them. Even Kalen had to shield his eyes, though the pain in his burned wrist paled compared to the sudden scorching radiance. He fully expected Neria to be incinerated, transformed to glass like so many before her. But for a heartbeat, she remained. Bathed in swirling fire, the queen's features contorted with triumph and agony in equal measure. As if defying all reason, she held her place, mouth twisted into a silent scream. The flame roiled around her, a storm of embers tearing at her robes. Then, with a thunderous crack, the basin erupted in a pillar of incandescence that surged skyward. It seemed as though the heavens themselves might be split open. When the light dimmed, Neria stood gasping, her eyes alight with an otherworldly fire. Sparks still clung to her hair, and an unholy glow pulsated beneath her skin, as if she had ingested pure lightning. She raised her hands and laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "I have taken it! The flame is mine!" Yet even as she proclaimed her victory, fractures appeared along her arms, hairline fissures glowing like molten lines under porcelain. Her eyes widened in alarm. "No," she breathed, shaking her head in denial. "I am no mere husk. I am queen." Slowly, relentlessly, the cracks spread, tracing her body in webs of luminous lines. Heat radiated from her like a furnace out of control. With mounting horror, Kaelin recognized the final phase of the flame's judgment. She was burning from within. The queen collapsed to her knees, arms raised as if pleading with the gods. Soldiers scrambled to help her, but could not get close without singeing their own flesh. Theros, still in the form of a child wreathed in fire, advanced calmly. Its expression was somber, like a judge pronouncing a sentence. Neria reached out to it, but her fingers disintegrated into glittering ash. Her eyes flashed a desperate mix of terror and fury. "I will not submit," she cried, voice cracking. One last burst of brilliance enveloped her, and then she was gone, disintegrated into particles that shimmered like broken glass on the wind. A hush settled, a hush that felt like the silent echo of centuries of failed ambition. Kaelin dropped to one knee, head bowed. The Queen's forces, now leaderless, could only stare, struck dumb by the incomprehensible power they had witnessed. Weapons clattered to the ground as men and women realised how close they stood to a force that did not bend to mortal will. Some turned and fled, while others simply sank to their knees, trembling. Only Kaelin remained steady, though his heart pounded in disbelief. He looked upon Theros. The child's fiery eyes met his, and in that gaze Kaelin read neither triumph nor rage, but a quiet sadness for yet another soul consumed by pride. Slowly Theros turned back toward the blazing flame. Kaelin understood that his own moment of reckoning had arrived. He swallowed, stepping forward. "Spirit of the eternal flame," he said gently, "what must I do to bring peace, to forge the blade that ends wars?" He offered his open palms, one of which still bore the raw burn from trying to save Neria. "I have nothing but this dream." The child's form flickered, shifting with the swirl of embers around it. "You would ask that which few ever ask," Theros murmured. "You show humility, yet also conviction. Know that with this fire comes choice, to protect or to destroy. Are you prepared to bear the cost?" Kaelin's breath caught in his throat. He nodded, tears burning at the corners of his eyes, uncertain whether they were from the scorching heat or the gravity of the moment. "Yes," he managed, "I'll pay whatever price is demanded." With that, Theros reached into the flame and withdrew a single glowing ember. It floated like a tiny star above the child's palm. The radiance was dazzling, but Kaelin felt no fear. He opened his hands, and the ember drifted toward him, settling just above his skin. Warmth coursed through it, an indescribable sensation that felt akin to holding a living fragment of hope. Queen Neria's grand ambition had ended in ashes, yet here he stood, entrusted with a spark of the same blazing power. "Go," Theros commanded softly. "Use this gift wisely. Remember, the fire does not discriminate. It will reflect what lies within your heart." The plateau fell silent. Soldiers still stood in shock, gazes locked on Kaelin as he carefully cradled the ember. He bowed to Theres, who offered no further words, only a nod that spoke volumes. Then Kaelin, the tears drying on his cheeks, turned and walked away from the basin. Behind him, the eternal flame still burned, unchanging and undiminished as it had for eons. The queen was gone, her ambition immolated by the very power she sought to enslave. The mountain winds carried the faint echoes of her final cry, yet in Kaelin's hands lay the possibility of a different future, a future shaped not by fear, but by the courage to do what was right, no matter the personal cost. Kaelin descended Mount Carith with the glowing ember snugly contained within a leather pouch close to his chest. Though the route was treacherous, he felt guided by an unseen force, as if the mountain itself recognised he carried its sacred secret. The trials he had passed seemed distant memories, overshadowed now by the enormity of the gift and the burden he bore. Yet each time he touched the pouch, he sensed a pulse, like a tiny heartbeat, reassuring him that there was still work to be done. Weeks turned into months as Kaelin made his way back home. Word of Queen Neria's disappearance rippled through the realms, igniting rumours and speculation. Some proclaimed she had been carried off by vengeful spirits. Others whispered that she had ascended to godhood. Kaelin knew the truth. She had been undone by her own hunger for power. In the Queen's stead, her armies fractured, and the throne passed to uncertain heirs. The domain she once held in an iron grip was now a patchwork of trembling territories and rebellious factions. Chaos threatened to surge through the land like a rising tide. Arriving in his home village, Kaelin found comfort in familiar faces. Yet he sensed he was no longer the same blacksmith who had departed months ago. Townsfolk noticed the subtle change in him, his posture straighter, his eyes steadier. Some asked if he had truly found the legendary flame. In response, he only smiled gently and said, "I have found a path and a duty." Behind closed doors in his modest workshop, he revealed the ember to his old mentor. The elder blacksmith bowed his head, awestruck by the living glow that seemed to pulsate with cosmic significance. Kaelin wasted no time. He built a new forge, one capable of withstanding intense heat beyond normal fires. Its structure was reinforced with rare metals and lined with special stones rumoured to harness the energy of the earth. Upon completing it, he fed the glowing ember into its heart. The forge flared to life with an otherworldly brilliance, bathing the workshop in shifting hues of gold and sapphire. Outside, villagers paused in their daily tasks, gazing in wonder at the strange radiance emanating from Kaelin's humble abode. At last, the time came to forge the blade he had long dreamed of. Gathering the finest ore from the local mines, an ore known for its purity and resilience, Kaelin placed the raw metal in the mystical forge. As the ember's energy coalesced around the material, he used his blacksmith's hammer, the same one he had carried up the mountain, to strike the metal with rhythmic precision. Each blow sent sparks dancing into the air, illuminating the workshop with fleeting constellations of light. Sweat beaded on Kaelin's brow, but it was not simply from physical exertion. It felt as though he was channeling the life force of the flame of Theros into every stroke. Night after night, he toiled. The metal responded like no alloy Kaelin had ever worked with, taking shape as if guided by its own purpose. The forging process became a meditative dance, his hammer meeting the blade in perfect unity. With each strike, he silently offered a vow that this sword would not be a vessel for conquest, but a beacon of truth and protection. Exhaustion tugged at him, yet the ember's warmth fueled his resolve. At times, he fancied he heard Theros' voice in the forge's crackle, reminding him of the choice that comes with fire, to warm or to burn. Finally, under the pale light of a waning moon, the sword was finished. Its blade shimmered with a subtle radiance, neither blinding nor dull, but alive with a gentle luminescence that seemed to respond to Kaelin's touch. He christened it Sincerity, for the sword's purpose was to reveal truth rather than spill blood. Running his hand along its edge, he felt no malice in the metal, only a quiet readiness. To test the blade's nature, he invited a weary traveller from a distant kingdom into his workshop. The traveller had once served under Queen Neria's banner, but deserted after witnessing the violence that followed her conquests. When the traveller lifted Sincerity, the blade glowed softly, reflecting a sense of relief as though empathising with the man's weariness. Then Kaelin asked a local troublemaker, a thief known for lying, to grip the hilt. In the thief's grasp, the blade turned cold and dull, refusing to shine. Astonished, the thief dropped it, eyes wide with fear. Word spread quickly. Kaelin's sword could pierce through deceit itself. It didn't take long for the newly crowned regent of Neria's former kingdom, a young prince wrestling with civic unrest, to send for Kaelin. The blacksmith journeyed to the royal court, accompanied by the elder blacksmith who had taught him everything. There he demonstrated sincerity before lords, knights, and courtiers. Some grew uneasy under its glow, while others gazed in awe. Sensing that this blade could serve as a linchpin for restoring order, the regent proposed a grand alliance. Let sincerity be the symbol that bound warring factions to truth. Representatives from neighbouring realms travelled to witness the sword. Treaties were drafted, sealed not by wax but by the solemn ritual of each signatory touching the blade. Liars could not hold it. Would-be tyrants could not bear its shining presence. As the months went on, something extraordinary happened. Where once warlords vied for power, negotiations took hold. Skirmishes were settled by oaths made while holding sincerity. Disputes that would have led to bloodshed were now resolved by a simple test of integrity. Kaelin travelled widely, carrying his sword and forging peace. He saw battered towns rebuilt, fields replanted, and families reunited. Time after time, the sword's quiet glow exposed lies, forcing leaders to confront their own duplicity. Peace, long elusive, began to take root. In distant lands, minstrels sang of the blacksmith who had ascended Mount Careth and returned with a blade that could reveal the soul's truth. They called him the Keeper of Sincerity, a title Kaelin accepted only reluctantly. He never forgot the trials he faced, the valley of tormenting whispers, the lake of mirrored pride, and the beast of smoke that demanded surrender. Nor did he forget Queen Nerea's tragic end. Every time he held the sword, he was reminded that power corrupts when harnessed without humility. Decades passed, and Kaelin aged, his once powerful arms growing lean. Yet his spirit remained as steadfast as when he first gazed into his forge. With peace flourishing across the land, Kaelin felt his purpose nearly fulfilled. He eventually returned to the foot of Mount Careth, accompanied by a handful of trusted companions who believed the journey might reveal a new chapter for the realm. They climbed partway up the mountain, carrying sincerity with reverence. Near the echoing wind, Kaelin paused, recalling the haunting voices that had once threatened to break his resolve. There, beneath the watchful peaks, he planted the sword firmly in a cairn of stones. "Let this blade remain here for those who truly need it," Kaelin declared. "May it stand as a testament to the cost of greed and the reward of humility." Though they urged him to keep it, he insisted on leaving sincerity behind. The realm had known peace for many years. The sword's radiance deserved to guide those who might face future darkness. After placing the blade, Kaelin pressed a calloused palm to the hilt one final time. A soft glow radiated from the sword as if offering him its silent gratitude. With that, he and his companions descended the mountain. Legends say the sword stayed there, sometimes shining at night to signal travellers lost in storms, guiding them to safety and truth. Others claim that in times of great turmoil, the blade vanishes from its resting place, reappearing in the hands of a new champion. Such are the mysteries left by those touched by Theros' flame. And what of the eternal flame itself? High atop Mount Careth, it still burns, untouched by wind or time. Theros remains guardian, awaiting the next soul brave enough, or humble enough, to seek its power. Sometimes, on the darkest nights, villagers say you can see a faint spark at the summit, reminding the world that true wisdom comes not from bending fire to one's will, but from letting its light reveal what lies hidden within. In the twilight of his life, Kaelin settled once more in his home village, forging simpler items, horseshoes, ploughshares, cooking pots. Children gathered around his hearth to hear his stories of the flame, the trials, and the forging of sincerity. Wide-eyed and curious, they hung on every word, and he taught them that the greatest power in the realm was not raw strength or cunning, but the quiet courage to confront one's own weaknesses. When Kaelin finally passed away, villagers lit a small pyre in his honour, a humble fire, nothing like the one atop Mount Careth. Yet as the embers drifted upward, some swore they saw a fiery stag prancing in the sparks, a silent blessing from Theros for the man who had sought not to rule, but to heal. The stories say that peace reigned for a generation after Kaelin's time, carried by the memory of Sincerity's glow. Every so often, a rumour arises of someone forging a blade that cannot lie, or of a traveller glimpsing a flicker of cosmic fire in the mountains, but these remain whispers, weaving into the tapestry of legend. For in every age one will rise, not to rule, but to listen, to walk the trials of humility and to embrace the burden of true power. The flame of Theros endures, waiting for the next seeker with a pure heart, ready to grant wisdom and test the sincerity of mortal souls.